Okay, Erev Tov, Chanukah Sameach, everyone. So, last night we established that beyond the first candle that we light, I'm talking about the Shamash, but beyond the first candle, all the others are Hidur Mitzvah. Mahadrin Mina Mahadrin. Right? The Mitzvah of Chanukah, each night, you light one candle and you fulfilled the basic Mitzvah. Beyond that is Hidur. And this gives rise to a number of interesting questions, some of them very, very relevant, which come up halacha l'maaseh. So let me just mention three, which the poskim discuss. What happens if a person was lighting candles, a person forgot to say the brachot and began lighting? So you've lit the first. Sometimes, if you have the oil wicks, you're using a separate candle as a shamash. Some people will light the shamash in the Chanukiah at the beginning or at the end. So let's say you light the shamash at the beginning, right? You don't say the bracha. Then you just carry on. You start lighting the candles. And then you realize you forgot to say the bracha. Can you then say the bracha because you haven't finished lighting the other candles? We have answers already. Let's wait. So there are those who say, on the one hand, you'll say, well, you've already lit a candle. You've already fulfilled the mitzvah. You can't say the ovel asiyatan, right? You can't say the bracha. Or you could say, well, you're still, the mitzvah, the way we fulfill it is by lighting all of the candles, and you could still say the bracha. That's one question. Here's another scenario, similar, slightly different. Let's say a person forgot which night of Hanukkah it was. Well, they come home, they don't know what day it was. They remember, in Shul, they saw the big Hanukkah had 3 candles. They thought it was the 3rd night. And they forgot, actually, it's the 5th night. So they lit 3 candles. Later on, you've sing Maariv Shiur, you've eaten your donuts, played dreidel, whatever it is. And you remember, oh, it's actually the 5th night. I'm missing 2 candles. So do you go back and light the extra candles? You can light whatever you want. Do you go back? Do you say a bracha? If you didn't say the bracha, or you did say the bracha, maybe you go back. Would you then say a bracha when you light the extra candles? That's another question poskim discuss. And a third one, which comes up, there are a number of these questions. These are the ones which are what I've just mentioned, are the questions which are still relevant to us. There are a whole group of questions which come up in terms of priorities of Ner Chanukah, which are unfathomable to us. The Gemara talks about, and the Rishonim discuss, a person doesn't have enough candles, doesn't have enough oil. Even if a person only has enough that they can have Ner Shabbat or Ner Chanukah, they only have enough that they could have Ner Chanukah or Kiddush Hayom. Baruch Hashem, these questions are unfathomable to us, but assuming a person didn't have enough candles, didn't have enough oil. So tonight's night number 5. So let's say a person had a limited amount of oil, not enough to light 5 candles, but they had enough to light, say, 3 candles. And is it better just to light 1 to fulfill the basic mitzvah, or add a little bit more candles, more light, more hidur? What should you do? So Rabbi Akiva Eiger has a tshuva. We mentioned in a slightly different context last night. Rabbi Akiva Eiger discusses one of these questions. And he says the following. He says a person didn't say the bracha, lit the first candle, can they now continue and say the bracha? So his first position, he says absolutely not. You can't say, we discussed last night, can you say the bracha just on hidur mitzvah or not? So he says a person, once you've lit 1 candle, you've fulfilled the mitzvah. Anything you're lighting beyond that is hidur. So you've already done it. You don't say the bracha on hidur mitzvah. And that's why Rabbi Akiva Eiger said, this is what we mentioned last night, that the other members of the household that are going to light separately, according to the Ashkenazi practice, in order for them to be able to say the bracha, when they're lighting their own candles, that's also just hidur. And therefore they should have in mind that they aren't included in the mitzvah of the first person, the balabait, who is saying the bracha and lighting the candles. So that when they light, it's not just hidur. When they light, it's their mitzvah, and they can say the bracha as well. That's
one. That's I would understand for a lot like Ner, but she also listen. We should be able to make.
Okay, so there's a whole discussion in there. I'm not getting into now, but let's just discuss that. It's a good hara. We're not going to go into it, but let's just stick with Ladlik Ner Shulchan. Okay, but that's what he says for that, because we'll see even with that bracha, it is somewhat contentious. So that's what Rabbi Akiva Eiger starts off saying. Then he quotes the discussion from the Pri Chadash, says the following. The second question, which I mentioned, right? A person lit 3 candles. Later on, they realize they should have lit 5 candles. So they come now and light the extra 2 candles. Do they say the bracha or not? So the Pri Chadash says, no, they don't say the bracha. And he gives 2 reasons. One is because when he lit in the first place, he had in mind that he was lighting for all the candles he was going to light, and that even though he made a mistake, he shouldn't come and say the bracha again. But the second reason he says is because you're going and you're now adding extra candles, you're lighting again. That is hidur mitzvah. You don't say the bracha just on hidur mitzvah. You say the bracha on the mitzvah itself, not on hidur. That's the Pri Chadash. Says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, but we have other achronim. Eliyahu Rabbah, again, it's another one of the achronim who's quoted on just about every page of the Mishnah Berurah. Eliyahu Rabbah says you do say the bracha. You do come along and you say the bracha for hidur mitzvah. What?
He said the bracha for the first 3. Now, how about the next 2?
Okay, so that's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about. So it's not clear. The truth is that in the Tshuva there, which discussed it, it's not 100% clear if he means to say that he forgot to say the bracha the first time, or that he said the bracha the first time and he's saying it again. But either way, to say that you now come along and say the bracha is a chiddush, Rabbi Akiva Eiger says in that case, only because we have 3 factors which join together, only because in the absence of any one of these factors you wouldn't, but having all 3 factors together, you can say the bracha when you come to light the last 2 candles. He says, number 1, you have the Eliyahu Rabbah, you have an opinion in the poskim who says you can say the bracha just for hidur mitzvah. He says, number 2, the fact is that we mentioned over la'asiyatan. Right? So what does over la'asiyatan mean? When we say that we need to say the bracha for a mitzvah just before we fulfill the mitzvah, that if the mitzvah is still being fulfilled, if it is a continuous action that we are still doing, we can still, even if we didn't say the bracha earlier, we can still say it later. So poskim discuss mitzvah of tzitzit, discuss the mitzvah of lulav, discuss various mitzvot which have a continuous fulfillment. And he says you could say perhaps, it's a little bit more difficult to say it by Chanukah, but he says perhaps you could say by Chanukah while you're still lighting the candles, it still counts as over la'asiyatan. It's number 2. And he says number 3, that we have poskim who say that even when it's not over la'asiyatan, there is an opinion that you could still, even once you've done the mitzvah, you could still say the bracha. So says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, any one of these mitzvot, any one of these factors by himself would not be enough, but you add in all 3 together, and therefore he says, in the case of the Pri Chadash, a person lit 3 candles, let's say they didn't say a bracha, and then later on, they remember, they need to light an extra 2. He says, now you could say the bracha when you light those extra candles. One more caveat, which is this only applies if the first 3 candles are still burning, and you're coming along to add on and to have all 5 candles. If the first 3 have gone out, and now you just come along and light another 2, you haven't really done anything, and there you would not say a bracha. So that is Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Now, based on the second question, what we've said, it seems to contradict what he said at the beginning regarding when you're lighting in the first place. So 2 ways to explain. Either we could say that Rabbi Akiva means to change. Rabbi Akiva Eiger means to change his opinion. So say originally that sort of the default position is that I would have thought that you can't say the bracha, but all these factors together say that you can. Or he's quoting a different opinion. So it's not 100% clear at the end of the day what Rabbi Akiva Eiger's final ruling is regarding the person who knew how many candles to light, started lighting, but lit the first one without saying the bracha. But either way, his default, his instinct, his reaction to this is that you should not be able to say the bracha once you've lit the first candle. The Ktav Sofer deals with the same question. He starts off from a slightly different place, and he comes to a somewhat different conclusion as well. So he starts off with the question of what I mentioned before, somebody who has enough oil, not for what they need for the entire night. They don't have enough for 5 nights. They have enough for 3 nights. Is it better to have at least mahadran to increase what you can to light that much? And the Ketav Sofer says no. He says it's better if you're not going to have mahadran min mahadran for that night. You don't have enough for 5, so just light 1. Don't light any more. Why? He says kol hamosif gorea. He says because why is it mahadran min mahadran that you light 5 or 6 or 7 or 8? Because that night is night 5, 6, 7, or 8, and it's recognizable when the miracle took place, how long it took place for. We discussed yesterday. He said, but if you're lighting 3 candles on the 5th night, that's not hidur. That's worse. He says, rather than you're not going to have that hidur, rather just light the 1 and be done with it. And therefore, he says as well that if a person made a mistake and they lit the wrong number of candles, it's very, very important afterwards, so long as the candles are still burning, to go back and light them as well. What about the bracha? So he says, the Ketav Sofer says as follows. He quotes other poskim who say, you've lit the first candle, you forgot to say the bracha, you can go back and you can still say the bracha. He says, yes, you can and you should, if you're still lighting, say the bracha. Why? Not because I'm lighting, we say bracha on hidur mitzvah or not, but because, he says, this is all one, as Rabbi Kenigsberg mentioned, but he takes us further. He says it's all one continuous mitzvah. The fact the number of candles that I'm lighting that night, it all comes together. It's all one unit. I can't separate them. And therefore, so long as you haven't lit all of the candles you need, that's still a vel asiyatan, you can still come along and say the bracha. So I'll leave you with one question just to think about, based on what the Ketav Sofer says. What he doesn't address, but an interesting question nonetheless, is as follows. Let's say a person forgot to say the bracha. They lit the candles. They finished lighting all of their candles. Now there are other people in the household who are also lighting candles. Would we say that the first person can still say the bracha while the other people are lighting candles? Why? So according to Rabbi Kenigsberg, the answer is definitely no. Because Rabbi Kenigsberg said each one is disconnected. You, the other people in the household, need to have in mind you're not part of the first person's mitzvah, otherwise you can't say the bracha. But the Ketav Sofer, who says that it's all part of continuing the mitzvah, we don't call the extra candles hidur, we call it part of the mitzvah. This is part of the takana, the way Chazal established that we fulfill the mitzvah. Madrin min madrin. Would that therefore mean that while the other members of the household are lighting, that is part of the continuous mitzvah, and the first person could still say the bracha or not? That's the question which I leave you with. Again, l'katchila, obviously, we should try not to forget. Say the bracha before you light your first candle, and then there are no questions and no speculation. Rabbi Hanania ben Akasha, Omer, Tzakadosh Baruch Hu, Zakot Yisrael, Lefachach Ba'alem Torah Mitzvot, Shnei Ma'adanech V'Tzman Tzako, Yagdil Torah V'Yadil.